Hello, welcome to Wearing History. Today we're going to look at how to put pockets in the smooth sailing pattern. This is my best-selling pattern and it's come out quite a long time ago. At the time I based it off a 1930s original which had no pockets. It has front pleats like this that are stitched down. It's really flattering, comes in misses and extended sizes. And after we add the pockets, it's going to look like this. So I've added curved pockets. You could alternate any kind of pocket shape that you want, but it's going to look like this and it still has a side zip opening. This one's curved and I added deep pockets so it's deep enough to stick my phone in. I have a little trouble with my overhead lighting and camera for this one, so the first part is a bit choppy, but I hope you understand. The first thing you need to do is take your front pattern piece. That's the one that has the tucks that you see there, the two lines that you would bring together. And we're going to trace this off because we want to have an under pocket shape and we want to have a regular front of your pattern. If you already trace your pattern, you'll just trace two of them instead of having one cut one like I have here. Mark your notches and mark it deep enough that you think you're going to have your pocket bags because you need to be able to have it quite long so that you can do all that. You're also going to transfer the darts. So I used I'm sorry, not darts, the tucks. So I used a pointed rotary, I forget what they're called, just a pattern tracer. They're really pointy. And after it's transferred it looked like this. So I want to draw my pocket shape now. So I'm guesstimating about how deep I want it. I'm also drawing my seam allowance on, which is 1/2 inch for this pattern, because I want to be sure that I know exactly where my seam lines are, and that will help me to shape my pocket. I'm looking at my hand now for about how deep I want the pocket to be, and remember to put it below the seam allowance line. Now I'm just going to eyeball it and see how I want my curve to go. In retrospect, I could have made these a lot less deep on the side. They could have been up closer to the waistline. But in the 1930s, the pockets kind of came down low. So yeah, I just went with it. You can use this pattern anywhere from 1930s through 1950s for vintage looks, or even for modern wear. They're pretty timeless. And this was not a reproduction pattern. This is one that I started with an original and made a gazillion different versions of, so it's really my own draft that combines a vintage shape with somewhat more modern fit. Still loose though. So I'm just eyeballing this and curving it how I want it to be. I find it helps if your line comes down a little bit straight from the side and a little bit straight from the top, so the curve doesn't get like a weird thing. I'm just cutting it off now. Now remember, where you drew it, that is your seam line. That is not including seam allowance. Now I'm taking this piece and just for my reference, I'm taping it onto the copy that I made because I want to know exactly where that line was drawn. Remember, no seam allowance. I'm comparing them and making sure they're still the same shape, and they are, which is fantastic. If not, make another copy. Now I'm going to draw my seam allowance on, and I really probably should have done this last. So you might want to do this at the very end of when you're finished, otherwise it's a little bit fussy to line it up with all the pieces. You're just going to tape here, and then you're going to add your 1/2 inch seam allowance with a clear ruler. I'm just drawing my seam line in because I want to make sure I have my lines exactly where they're supposed to be. Then do 1/2 inch. And that will be your cut line. You can connect those dots, and then I'm writing on it so I remember this is where my seam allowance is, and it's 1/2 inch. So I have 1/2 inch seam allowance written there. Now trim it up with your paper scissors. Okay, great. That part is ready. Now I'm going to estimate about how deep I want my pockets to go. So I'm using my phone for reference because I want it deep enough that I can stick my phone in there and it won't have it peek out or fall out of my pocket. And that is about how I want it to be. Now, do keep in mind with your tuck there, you do want it a bit off from your tuck because you don't want your seam allowance and your tuck to get all mixed up. It'll make it really bulky there in the front. So I backed it off about 1/2 inch to, 5/8 of an inch from where the tuck line is. Now I'm using a curved ruler to draw my line in, and if you don't have one, you can just eyeball it. Now I'm not going to cut this. This is just for my reference. Now look, see, I'm like, oh wait, I need to make sure this will all fit after it's all said and done, and then I need to make sure it's backed off from the tuck. So now I am just, I decided to add a little bit extra for my seam allowance, and then I'm doing my seam allowance on the inside of that line. So that's why the two lines cross. So added extra seam allowance on the bottom, and then cheated it in on the side. So that's my new line with seam allowance. Checking my hand, checking my phone. Looks like it'll work. Backed off from that line. Looks good. Now you're going to grab an extra piece of paper, or sorry, the traced piece of paper, and you're going to line it up again. And this is what I meant when I said it was a little bit fussy with the seam allowance. I should have added the seam allowance last on that pocket piece. So you're just going to align these, make sure that the seam line matches exactly the same. So over here at the top of that front piece, it's a 1/2 inch overlap, just to clarify that. I'm going to tape it just for the second here, and now I'm going to use my pattern tracer. I'm going to trace the outside line and make sure I got my cross lines, and then I'm going to remove the tape. And you can't see it here, but it is transferred. So now I'm going to take my pencil and I'm just going to draw that line. And that's my new pocket shape, which is awesome. So that is including seam allowance. This will be cut of the fashion fabric, so it'll be visible when you sew it. You'll see in a minute. Now I'm going to fold this piece of paper in half since it's quite wide, and I want to transfer it because I need to make another piece. You need to have the facing for the pants also. So this is the visible part, then you need a facing piece. So there's really 3 different pieces that you need to make the pocket. The front, the underside that you see, and then the facing that you don't see. So instead of taping this, I'm pinning my paper. There might be an easier way to do this, but I had pins handy, so I used this. I'm going to cut it to duplicate it. And now I have 2. Now that facing piece, that's your seam line. So I'm using my pattern tracer again. And now I'm going to draw that line. Okay, so that's going to be the seam line for that. Now I have to add my seam allowance, which is above that line. And this is the facing piece that I mentioned before. And now I'm just going to cut that away. I'm going to compare the two to make sure that they look right. And they look pretty darn good. Let's see, I'm going to put a grain line on it so I remember how to cut it. And a grain line on the other piece. I probably should have done that first. Comparing the two to make sure that the seam lines matched, and they did. Okay, so here's the 3 pieces that you're going to need. There's the pants piece, the facing piece, and the under piece. And the layer goes like that. So that goes underneath, actually. There you go. So those 2 should line up exactly, and then there's this one. So when you sew it, you'll sew those 2 together, right side together, the facing and the front. You'll see in a sec. And I'm labeling them to make sure I know which piece goes to what. So those 2 sew, and then you flip it to the inside, and then that laps on top, and then you sew those 2 together. Whoop! And then you've got it. So I'll show you that in a second here. And then you baste those together, and then you assemble it the same way you do the regular smooth sailing. You just put your zipper in and everything else. It helps if it's not such a bulky fabric, to be honest. Like if you use a really thick denim, it's going to be hard to put a side zipper in. You're going to have to alternate your closure. But for a very lightweight denim like I'm using here, it's kind of almost like a chambray, even though they called it a denim. It really works really well. I could still do like an invisible zip if I wanted to, or the slotted zip like I have in the instructions. So right now I'm grabbing the facing piece that we drafted. Remember, it's curved like the front of the pants. And I'm pinning the 2 together. I start at the top near the waist and then at the bottom near the side. And that way I ease the 2 curves in together. And it's a lot easier than just starting at one side and going to the end. You really want to ease it in the middle. Now I'm stitching with 1/2 inch seam allowance. which is what we added, you remember. And ease that curve in. Try not to get any puckers. It may distort a little bit on the curve if your curve is drastic, and that's quite normal. You'll see that in pants all the time. But try to keep it nice and smooth and don't pull it, and don't get any puckers. Back stitch there, and clip your seam. Clip your threads. And now you're going to grab your scissors, and I want you to clip in the seam allowance on that curve. You're not clipping it all the way to the stitch line, but I'm going about 1/8 of an inch away, and that's usually enough to ease it in that curve to make it lay nice and flat. And now I want you to go and press that. So you're going to press it under so that your curve will look like this. After it's pressed, this is an extra step you don't need to do, but I find that it's helpful to keep it from fraying. I'm going to top stitch now. On that curve, I'm using a little groove that's on the inside of my sewing machine foot, which is 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just easing it very smoothly, making sure I don't get any puckers or wrinkles. And to do this after you press, definitely press it first. And now I'm going to get to the end and back stitch. Okay, that's done. Looks great. From the wrong side it looks like this. Now you're going to grab the piece that's visible, I don't know what to call it, but the other pocket piece. You're going to put those two right sides together, and you're going to pin these together. Pin it first at the waist and then at the side, just like before. Or you can go down the straight part, that won't distort. But you'd want to, ease that curve in just like we did on the other side. So you see I pinned it at the side now, and now I'm going to ease between the 2 points so that the curve gets nice and flush. And now you're going to stitch that with 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're only grabbing these two pieces, you're not grabbing the outside of the pants at all. It'll just be the pocket bag, the pocket facing, or whatever they're called. 1/2 inch, ease it all the way around, take your pins out as you sew it. And then back stitch when you get to the end. And this is what it looks like when it's done. You've got your nice curve there. If you're going to serge it or finish that seam, do it now. And after that, then you do this part. That curve that you just sewn should be finished. I ended up serging mine, so I'm just pinning it for the video, and then I went and serged it, and then I continued with my construction after that. So pin the top and the bottom and ease it in. Make sure it lays really flush. You don't want this to pull at all. And it'll kind of take a little bit. See, I'm smoothing it with my hands. You gotta ease it into shape. You gotta listen to what the fabric wants to do and come to like a happy medium. Alright, so I'm smoothing it as best I can. And pinning it at the top. And if you've done the first steps the correct way, it really shouldn't fight against you too much, depending on your fabric. Now you're going to baste that at the sides and at the top. So again, just at the sides and at the top. And I'm not doing that here because I went and finished my seams. Check your pocket, make sure it fits, and it's good. All right, when it's all done, it looks like this. So after that, just continue your regular stitching how you would for the rest of the instructions of the pattern. Hope this helps. You can grab the pattern Wearing History on Etsy.com. Also wearinghistorypatterns.com. Thanks so much for watching.